Think about everything you were taught growing up: mathematics, history, how to write an essay, how to drive a car. Now think about what you were never taught: what to do when rage floods your body so fast you can't think. What to do when grief hollows you out for days. How to sit with anxiety without letting it make every decision for you. This gap isn't an accident. Emotional education has been largely absent from formal schooling for most of human history, treated as either unnecessary or too private for the classroom. The result is that most adults are navigating some of the most complex experiences life offers: loss, conflict, fear, shame, with the tools of a 9-year-old, because that's roughly when the learning stopped. Emotional regulation, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your emotional responses, is a learnable skill. Not a personality trait, not something fixed at birth. A skill, exactly like reading or driving, that develops through knowledge and practice. The absence of it in your life is not evidence of weakness. It's evidence of a gap in your education. This video is about filling it. Emotional regulation is widely misunderstood. Many people assume it means controlling your emotions, keeping them tightly managed, never showing too much, maintaining composure at all costs. That model produces suppression, not regulation, and suppression has its own significant costs: physical health effects, emotional numbness, and eruptions in unexpected places. The actual definition is more nuanced and more interesting. Emotional regulation refers to the processes, conscious and unconscious, by which individuals influence which emotions they have, when they have them, and how they experience and express those emotions. Notice what that definition includes. It doesn't say eliminate emotions. It says influence. The goal is agency, not absence. A well-regulated person is not someone who feels nothing. They are someone who can feel the full range of human emotion, including the difficult ones, without being overwhelmed, without losing perspective, and without causing unnecessary harm to themselves or others. They can be moved without being swept away. That is a very different aspiration than simply not feeling things, and it's the aspiration worth working toward. It helps to think of emotional regulation not as a binary, you either have it or you don't, but as a spectrum that most people move along throughout a single day, depending on conditions. At one end is what psychologists call hyperarousal, the flooded, overwhelmed, reactive state where emotions drive behavior without any buffer. This is the state where we say things we regret, make decisions we later question, and feel completely at the mercy of what we're feeling. Heart rate is elevated, thinking narrows, and the capacity for empathy or perspective largely disappears. At the other end is hypoarousal, the shut down, numbed, disconnected state where emotions have been suppressed so effectively that the person can barely feel anything. This looks calm from the outside, but carries its own dysfunction: inability to connect, difficulty making decisions, a flatness that can resemble depression. In between is what Dan Siegel calls the window of tolerance, the zone of moderate emotional activation where optimal functioning occurs. Inside the window, you can think and feel simultaneously. You can process what's happening, access your values, and choose your response. The goal of emotional regulation is to spend more time in this window and to return to it more quickly when life pushes you out of it. You've almost certainly met people who seem to handle difficult situations with a steadiness that appears almost effortless. They don't fall apart under pressure. They remain curious and warm in conflict. They recover quickly from setbacks. It's tempting to attribute this to personality, to conclude that they were simply born with a more stable temperament, and that the rest of us weren't so lucky. The research tells a more hopeful story. While temperament does play some role, studies consistently show that much of what looks like natural emotional regulation is the product of experience. People who appear regulated have usually been fortunate enough to have relationships with parents, teachers, therapists, or partners in which they were seen, soothed, and taught through example how to manage emotional states. They may have also accidentally developed practices, exercise, reflection, creative work, that serve regulatory functions without their even knowing it. Neuroscience confirms this. The brain structures involved in emotional regulation, particularly the prefrontal cortex and its connections to the limbic system, develop and strengthen through experience. They remain plastic throughout adulthood, which means that if you didn't receive the relational or educational scaffolding that builds these capacities early, you can still build them now. The training happened for other people. It's available to you. Emotional dysregulation, the difficulty managing emotional responses effectively, carries costs that are easy to underestimate because they accumulate gradually and because they're often attributed to other causes. In relationships, dysregulation typically shows up as conflict that escalates beyond the original issue, withdrawal that damages closeness, or emotional reactions that leave others feeling uncertain and unsafe. Partners, children, and friends bear a disproportionate load when one person in the relationship is chronically dysregulated, often absorbing the overflow of emotions that were never processed. In professional life, dysregulation appears as difficulty managing feedback, reactive decision-making, communication that damages working relationships, and the chronic exhaustion of suppressing emotions throughout the workday. Many careers plateau, not because of skill deficits, but because emotional regulation problems limit the quality of relationships and decisions. And in the individual's inner life, the cost is perhaps most significant: the persistent low-grade suffering of being at the mercy of your own emotional states, the anxiety that governs too many decisions, the anger that arrives without warning and departs leaving damage, the shame that quietly limits ambition. These are not fixed features of a personality. They are the lived consequences of a skill that was never built, and they are changeable. The foundation of emotional regulation is laid in infancy and early childhood, in the space between a child and their primary caregiver. When a baby is distressed and the caregiver responds with consistent attunement, noticing the distress, soothing it, remaining regulated themselves, the child's nervous system begins to learn something fundamental. Emotions are temporary, manageable, and I am not alone in them. This process, which developmental psychologist Alan Shaw describes as affect regulation, literally shapes the neural circuits that govern emotional response. The right hemisphere of the prefrontal cortex, the area most involved in emotional self-regulation, develops significantly in the first 3 years of life, in direct response to relational experience. Children who receive consistent, attuned caregiving develop stronger regulatory capacity at a neurological level. When caregiving is inconsistent, frightening, or absent, the nervous system learns differently. Emotions become threats rather than experiences to be processed. The regulatory circuits develop around avoidance or hyperactivation rather than balanced processing. This isn't a permanent verdict. As we'll discuss later, these circuits remain malleable throughout life, but it explains why some people enter adulthood with significantly harder emotional terrain to navigate than others. It wasn't a choice, it was circumstance. Perhaps the most important and underappreciated fact about emotional regulation is that it can change, at any age, through the right experiences and practices. This is not wishful thinking. It is the consistent finding of decades of neuroscience and psychological research. Studies on mindfulness-based interventions show measurable changes in the structure and function of the prefrontal cortex after just 8 weeks of consistent practice. Research on emotion-focused therapy demonstrates significant improvements in regulatory capacity in adults with long histories of dysregulation. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson's work on contemplative practice shows changes in baseline emotional reactivity following sustained practice, changes visible in brain imaging. Perhaps most compelling is the body of research on the therapeutic relationship itself. Study after study demonstrates that a consistently attuned, regulating relationship with a skilled therapist, but also with certain kinds of friends, partners, or mentors, produces genuine changes in nervous system function. The relational experience that built the initial capacity can also rebuild it. The brain doesn't care how old you are when the learning happens. It cares that the right conditions are present. This video and this series is designed to begin providing some of those conditions. This week's content is designed as a complete educational journey through emotional regulation, not a collection of tips, but a structured understanding that builds from the ground up. The 21 short videos across this week each address a specific aspect of the topic, from the neuroscience of the amygdala hijack to the practical tool of the 90-second rule, from the role of childhood in shaping emotional responses to co-regulation, and what it means to build resilience over time. The 3 long-form videos, this one, Wednesday's deep dive into the brain science, and Friday's practical guide, are designed to complement the daily shorts by going deeper into each major dimension of the topic. Together, they offer something that most content in this space doesn't: a coherent, evidence-based picture of what emotional regulation is, why it matters, and what you can actually do about it. You don't need to have everything figured out before you begin. You don't need to be at a particular stage of your healing journey. You just need to be willing to learn something new about yourself and to approach that learning with the same curiosity and gentleness that emotional regulation itself requires. Start with the first short. Come back tomorrow. Let the understanding accumulate. Something will shift.